Our Game of the Year 2015 coverage continues with my co-host Ryan Reeh's Top 10 Editor's Choice video games of this year. Today is Monday, December 14th, 2015. You're listening to the 1P versus 2P podcast. I'm Taylor Reeh, as I've introduced before. This is my brother Ryan Reeh with me. Let's talk about your top 10. So we've sort of been continuing our Game of the Year coverage since week 1, which was last week's episode. If you haven't listened to it, check it out. We talked about a lot of honors, including things like Best Looking Game, Biggest Disappointments, stuff like that. But this time around, we want to talk about our personal favorites, and we've compiled a spreadsheet of our top 10, so let's get right to it with your number 10 choice, which is Galak-Z, the Dimensional, which was on PC and PS4, but you played it on PS4, right?
Right, and the controls for this game felt really great, which is probably the number one reason why it's number 10 on my list. It's a space shooter roguelike that has the feel of a Saturday morning cartoon show. If you've ever watched any anime cartoon shows or things like Macross or Gundam Wing, it has that kind of feel to it, to the fact where the pause screen has like a VHS tracking system. It has a really cool art style. So basically you pick up power-ups in this game, and that affects a little bit about how your ship and mech controls. You can kind of switch between the two on the fly once you pick up the ability to turn into the mech. The mech plays kind of like a character with a jetpack. The spaceship ends up feeling a lot like a shmup, and you end up switching a lot between the two. And the switching feels really fluid, and the controls for this game just feel really smooth. And it was a really nice game in the middle of the summer. It's being made by 17-bit, the people who brought you Skulls of the Shogun, and just a really fantastic game with a fantastic art style that I don't think enough people checked out. And it was my number 10 for this year.
So, being a roguelike, and this is a top-down shooter for the most part, do you think it being so difficult made it not very popular?
It's hard to say because a lot of harder roguelites have come out and have been way more popular. You know, Spelunky, Binding of Isaac, 1001 Spikes last year. I don't think a lot of people actually finished this game. I think the reason this one stood out so much was the feel of it, the Saturday morning cartoon aesthetic. The characters, even when you beat, they're even labeled seasons and episodes like a TV show would be. And after you beat every episode, which is basically a level, it goes to like credits. And it's just a really amazing way that they've put together this package. And I think that's what really spoke to people. And if that didn't speak to you, I don't think you picked this game up. So
interesting. I'm also sort of reading up on this game, and it looks like the original plans for this game included a PlayStation Vita version after they saw the success of other, like you mentioned, roguelikes like Spelunky really took off on that platform. But it seems like they decided it wasn't worth it and just stuck to PC and PS4. And I have to say, watching gameplay footage of this thing, it's really a gorgeous looking game. The backgrounds are so layered, and the way you shoot and the enemies are so very colorful. The lighting effects seemed fantastic. It's a huge contribution to this game, wouldn't you agree?
I would. And I'd actually just say, to add to that, they are planning on creating a mobile version of this game, which the controls on PS4 and PC feel so good, but they're a little more complicated than your average roguelike. And I have a hard time believing that they're going to do a good job with the iOS version, but they've said in interviews that they are planning on changing how the changing from the ship to the mech form works in the mobile version. So we'll see if that pans out. If, more people have iOS and Android devices, this game will get a little more exposure.
Does it feel like you can play it over and over again? Are these levels randomly generated? Like, is it an endless dungeon? What kind of roguelike is it?
The levels are randomly generated. The enemy placements are all different. There's a shop that's also very randomly generated. The power-ups in that shop are also randomly generated. And when you die, because you die a lot in roguelikes, that's kind of one of the standards of the genre, you basically respawn without as many power-ups. They give you kind of a chance to recuperate and try to get all that stuff back. But then if you die again, it's basically like Dark Souls. You've lost everything. that's really how they toy around with the difficulty. And as the seasons progress, you encounter more and more boss type enemies that really challenge your understanding of how to dodge and how to shoot and how the different power-ups actually work. So it's to your benefit. It's one of those things like a good roguelike, easy to learn, really difficult to master.
Interesting that it was originally planned for release actually in the middle of 2014. They decided to put this game off to be released this year. It seems like it was well worth the effort. And so, Ryan, it's your number 10 on your personal Game of the Year list. Let's talk about your number 9, which is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which I've got to say, I don't think it belongs that low on anyone's list, in my opinion. But let's hear you talk about it. What made you enjoy The Witcher 3?
Well, The Witcher 3, for me, is basically a fantasy Red Dead Redemption. It's you as Geralt running around trying to solve the world's problems while you're trying to solve your own problem of finding Ciri, who's basically become an adopted daughter of yours. And I like the way this game looks. I think, for me, the reason why it may be lower than on some people's lists is while I enjoyed it, I think I struggled a lot with the controls. And for me, the fantasy aesthetic can go one of two ways. I really like how Dragon Age's fantasy was dealt with. And The Witcher 3, I kind of go back and forth on. The Witcher 3 is a lot more realistic, a lot more brutal. There's a lot more... The violence is very violent. The sex is very sexy. And for me, it's kind of hard when you're talking about hard fantasy to really get into those kinds of mindsets with that. I think The Witcher 3 was trying to have it a lot of different ways. And I really liked the story and a lot of the side quests. I think some of those were really great. And then some of them were really, really not that great and felt just kind of like dead air to me. I also think that The Witcher 3 could have done a better job of tutorializing the beginning. Instead, what it does is it throws you into this Griffin fight like in hour 1. And like right before the Griffin fight, your Witcher pal gives you a crossbow and says, here you go. And then like you get a brief paragraph about how to use ranged weapons. And then you're kind of left to your own devices whether or not that helps you in that fight or not. I actually ended up not using it. And the Witcher games have always been about preparing ahead of time for battles. And that seemed kind of like a misstep for me because it was, how do you prepare for something that's going to happen 2 minutes later?
For such a huge, excellent open world game, you're right. If you haven't played Witcher 2, you're really kind of left out of learning how to play it. I agree with you, but there's, especially right at the start of the game, there's this overwhelming sense of exploration. I thought the enemy design was incredible. Character progression just felt right. Everything seemed so finely tuned in that game. And on top of that, personally, I felt that the graphics just were absolutely stunning. Character models seemed so lifelike. Dialogue, it really felt like a fully fledged, thought out universe. And I really enjoyed that. But I want to ask you, what did you think about the world they built around, the open world that you have to explore, and the little direction that you get in completing that game?
2015 was full of open world games, and I think The Witcher 3's world is massive in scope, and they've definitely done a great job of just the sheer scale of it was very, very impressive. It sometimes felt like The Witcher 3's open world was a little rambly. The horse controlling Roach, not the easiest thing in the whole world. It felt like every time you whistled for him, he'd come just a little slower. I remember it even in Red Dead Redemption, the horse coming a little faster for that. And it's funny, I really enjoyed being more on foot in The Witcher 3 than I did in any other open world game. And I think this game is filled with a lot of like little moments that you don't really expect. You're just off wandering, do some side quest, and then you pick up some random thing. It's like fight this monster nest, or here's a quest to find this Witcher gear that's way better than your current gear. And I think what they've done is a really amazing thing, which is they've made the world feel very lived in. It feels like the characters aren't just NPCs. They're actually living and breathing in this world. And I don't think a lot of other open world games this year really did that. It felt like every individual court jester and courtesan and every little person flitting about in the bigger cities, Nilfgaard, really felt like they were actually living there.
the gestures of the characters, the way in which they spoke, like the intonation, the tone, sort of the volume, I thought was excellent. It was just, the voice acting was just so on point. The dialogue was so well crafted. And that's what I think is the biggest plus for me, the biggest positive of this game. If I had to come up with one negative, I think there's sort of an overemphasis with the side quests in terms of them being fetch quests. And that's a little unfortunate, but the game is so huge that they're just completely optional. You really can get lost on whatever quest you want. You could sort of be running to one objective and then stumble upon like a situation that you should resolve. Like there might be like a horse cart that's tipped over and it was raided by bandits, and the guy asked for your help or to solve like a robbery. It's just really interesting. It feels, like you said, so lived in, and that's why I think it deserves a spot on everyone's top 10 list for this year. Anything else you want to say about Witcher 3? You want to heap any more praise?
I will say that I think CD Projekt Red has done a really great job of really supporting this game. They've patched a lot of great things. They've improved the movement controls. They've added a lot of free DLC. The DLC that they did sell seems very good. It seems to add to the very popular minigame Gwent. I think in the scope of video game card games, it's one of the better ones, and definitely felt not like a waste of time. I think the one thing I would say that I hope that they eventually patch up, I spent a lot of time in the UI. You spend a lot of time in menus in The Witcher 3 with between the crafting and the item system, and I wish that just felt a little tighter. It does a serviceable job, but to me, it was kind of hard to navigate with a controller. But other than that, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is absolutely a great open world game from this year, and I highly recommend that you play it.
All right, makes sense. Those sort of criticisms make sense to me as to why it's number 9 on your list. So let's move on to number 8. Number 8 being Grow Home. This is an interesting small project by Ubisoft Reflections. It's sort of a small studio from the publisher Ubisoft. And this was released pretty early this year, in February, but it wasn't available free on PlayStation Plus until September. So it had a long life, and I think it really opened up its audience as soon as it became free on PS Plus. I think that's when you started to play it, right? On PS4?
I actually played it on PC. It was by the time it came out on PS4, it was discounted on Steam, so that's when I picked it up. But for me, Grow Home was a refreshing, let's call it a video game vacation from all the other violent games that I've played this year. The Grow Home doesn't really have any violence in it. And what's nice is that it's nice to kind of like take like a 5-minute breather and have a game that's really just calming and relaxing. And that's what this game did for me. It's you playing as this robot crawling up and trying to grow a beanstalk to try to get back to your mothership. Yeah, it just I love the art style. It really spoke to me. The controls I think are what kind of keep it from going higher on my list. The right trigger is your right hand, your left trigger is your left hand when you're climbing. And sometimes that didn't feel intuitive. I also feel like, so there, like a lot of Ubisoft games that are about climbing towers, there's a lot of collectibles in this game. And they lock some weird things behind collectibles. When you collect the first 10 of 100 items, you get camera control, which is something that shouldn't be locked behind a collectible. But I feel like the unlockables that they leave after that, a jetpack, some other stuff, trackers for
like a leaf parachute, if I remember correctly.
Right. All that stuff felt very intuitive, and those felt like good upgrades. It felt like a good progression system in a game that honestly didn't really need one. And it was a short, 4 to 5 hour experience, but it was a very memorable 4 to 5 hour experience for me.
Yeah, that's my main criticism about the game. Like, the physics-based gameplay is really cool. Like, it's a rock climbing simulator. It's colorful, and it's beautiful, and very soothing and relaxing to play. But it's just too short of a game for me to really appreciate it fully. But I have to give it props for its visual style. It's this colorful, polygonal, small world, but the verticality and the platforming are really on point. And the mechanics of you controlling your individual arms to climb around and then float around and jump to grow this giant beanstalk is very interesting. There's a few really noticeable kind of issues in my opinion, that's holding it back. But I respect the fact that you enjoyed the game this much to warrant on your top 10 list.
Yeah, for me, it felt, the quirkiness of it felt like reminiscent of Katamari, and I love the Katamari games, and that's what Grow Home really reminded me of. And I'd have to say, I like controlling the climbing controls in Grow Home way more than I do in any Assassin's Creed game. I think the Assassin's Creed games have gotten way too complicated with their controls, and they don't always do what you want them to. And in Grow Home, they do exactly what you want them to do. So I think if Ubisoft is smart, they will import the climbing tech and keeping it simple into their other games, and they'll have a hit every time.
Yeah, very, very minimalist, and it's such a gorgeous game. It's definitely very interesting to see it come out of a studio like Ubisoft. So, all right, that's your number 8. Let me look back at this list. And number 7 is a game that got a lot of attention earlier this year, and that is Bloodborne. And is that a PS4 exclusive, if I remember that correctly?
It is.
And this is along the same veins as Demon Souls and the Dark Souls series. In fact, the same designers worked on this game. Feels very close to those in terms of gameplay. What's your take on it?
To me, Bloodborne is probably the most approachable Dark Souls, and I think there are different opinions on that depending on who you ask. But for me, it was the easiest to get into, and because the game is a lot more defensive, you have to rely a lot on your reflexes instead of just hiding behind a shield like you can in the Souls games. You really have to learn how to dodge. You really have to learn the enemy tells. And I think that the game does a great job of kind of introducing you to that and then ramping up the difficulty quite quickly. As I recall, I bought this game and I also gave you a copy because I said, I really enjoy the Souls games. I really want to give this to you. And I don't think for you it was as appealing because I'm not sure that action games are that much of a thing. But for me, I like my games a lot more difficult these days. And Bloodborne hits that sweet spot of being accessible, yet also being brutally hard.
Yeah, it's brutally hard, but for me, I don't get much out of it because it's too difficult to be fair in my eyes, and I think a lot of people disagree with me. The thing that really drew me to it is its visual style. It's this gothic atmosphere, and the character models are so dark and almost seem like you're playing as something out of like a Lovecraft novel, or you're in Dracula's universe. And that's what got me really interested, because these kinds of things just aren't in the Souls series games. But I was so incredibly frustrated with how the game just punishes you over and over again for just a small amount of hits. You could die from 2 hits from a common enemy, and now you're back like 15 minutes from where you started from, and it just felt too frustrating for me to get a lot of enjoyment out of it. Again, though, I respect people who put in the time and are patient enough to perfect how to play that game and how to proceed, because it seems like a rewarding experience.
Yeah, that for me is the key right there, the word rewarding. I feel like that's a common criticism of Dark Souls games, and I actually feel like Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2 do a better job of giving you a reason why you're doing all this stuff. In Bloodborne, you're kind of dropped into this world and you said, okay, you're a hunter, and the nature of what's happening in the world isn't really made clear. And, like a lot of these games, the story isn't as important. It's really the moment to moment action that matters. And the ending, I will say, is kind of lame. There's a true ending, and then of course an ending you get if you just play the game without thinking about it too hard. And I wasn't too satisfied with the way things conclude, but that's not really the point of these games. The point of these games isn't the destination, it's the journey. And for me, the journey is well worth making Bloodborne number 7 on my list.
Well, the journey includes these interesting little checkpoints. They're sort of lanterns that are all over the place, and they're kind of like safe zones. Like as soon as you reach one, it's sort of your autosave point. And you can replenish your health, and you can work on the RPG elements like taking care of your inventory. It's this little hub world. But as soon as you get back in, repopulates all the enemies that were in the world in that area as you're progressing. So it really does try to gate your progress at every single turn. And it even includes like a New Game Plus mode. Did you ever play that?
No, I kind of stopped after the New Game Plus, but I will say that Bloodborne does a better job of introducing co-op and PvP play, and also there are randomly generated dungeons in Bloodborne. So I did check those out after I progressed through the main game. That felt really like an honest way of doing the more random elements of Bloodborne. It felt like they were creating entirely new levels out of the same scraps that I've been playing before, and it didn't feel dated. It didn't feel old. Yeah, that was a really great aspect. I hope that part translates into other Souls games. Dark Souls 3 is coming out this coming year, and I hope they do some version of that in that game. But for me, Bloodborne did it's just the entire package as far as action games. If you like your games difficult, I highly recommend it.
If you're a masochist and you enjoy third-person action RPGs, Bloodborne is definitely worth checking out. All right, let's talk about your number 6, which is Fallout 4, and you've played that on PC, right? This game came out very, very recently, but I know there have been mixed reviews about people playing on consoles.
Yeah, that was the reason I picked it up on PC. I have a history of playing the Fallout games on console because I didn't have PC power enough to power that open world. Now I finally do, and I have to say it was absolutely worth it. I had no performance issues with the PC version of Fallout 4, other than the typical Bethesda game hitches. I had some actually funny bugs this time. One time I shot a guy and he flew up straight into the air, very comically. But for me, that kind of sums up the Fallout 4 experience. Despite its jankiness and despite, all the complicated systems at play, you really can't help but have a good time with the game. For me, the reason it's not higher is that it plays a lot of the same notes that Fallout 3 does story-wise, and it's doing a lot of the same things. I actually liked the world of Fallout 3's Capital Wasteland a lot better. And I actually liked Fallout New Vegas's Desert Wasteland also better. But I think they do a good job in Fallout 4 of pushing you to do the next thing, the next step in every side quest. And I really thought that some of the companion characters have been the best that they've been in recent Bethesda games.
Fallout 4 is a brand new setting. It is a wasteland, but this time around it's in a post-apocalyptic Boston. And I loved how true it was to that city. I mean, you can explore things like Diamond City, which would be Fenway Park. It's really cool the way they've built that sort of non-linear open world. And this game is uniquely colorful compared to the past Fallout games. The Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas had this green-yellow filter to them. And this one is a lot more colorful, which I thought added some character to this, and the dialogue is infinitely better in my opinion, because the companions really feel like they're invested in your quest to like rid the wasteland of evil, and there's this big shadowy organization called the Institute that's replacing people with these cyborgs known as synths, and there are all these different factions that come into play, ones that you can join, ones that you can fight against. And that's what I love about these series, is how non-linear it is. It is a true open world that you can just roam around in and see tons of new things every 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, for me, Fallout 4 had a lot of world to explore, but it felt like there were one too many times where I thought there was a lot of houses that I was walking by and I couldn't go in them. These games do a great job of adding a lot of a world and a lot of color and a lot of character, particularly when you talk about the factions and the companions. But for me, there weren't enough places I could enter and actually do my business, which is why I think they built the settlement system, which I surprisingly got into despite not giving a really good reason of how to navigate that stuff. They tell you that you can do it. You can build settlements and you can build entire towns structured around how you want to build them, what kinds of shops and equipment setups that you want to have there, where you stash your power armor, where you keep your companions. And I really got involved with that stuff, even though I was kind of questioning why I was doing it the whole time.
That is a huge add to that series. There hasn't been that before. and they don't do a good job of explaining those systems or why it's important at all. You can go through the entire game without really interacting with it at all. It's really just like sort of this hub area, which is the first area called Sanctuary. It's the town that the game starts you off in. And you can take over other settlements and sort of build caravans and build up some money, some caps, and build up trade routes. And it doesn't seem necessary at all. You really don't have to interact with it. But those that do, it's all really for naught. I didn't really understand the point of it. It's not its strongest suit, I would agree. But for me, Fallout 4 is really like substance over style. Like there's just so much to do, so much to see. The quests are given to you in a lot of different ways. It can be random encounters. You could be wandering by a city and someone needs like radios for help from a radio tower. You can have mainline quests or companions that just all of a sudden talk to you out of the blue and implore you to do something specific for them. And I just love how the companions have, the interactions have improved in these games. Unfortunately, there's still that really terrible mechanic called encumbrance. So again, another criticism there, but I don't think this is a game that holds you back from exploring this open world. It's just so visually stunning. You can see for miles in the distance. And yeah, I just felt so engrossed in Fallout 4.
And as usual with Bethesda games, the side quests are way more interesting than the main story. Although I will say that the main story goes in some very interesting directions. I didn't expect the twists that eventually came. And I will say that it seems like somebody at Bethesda has some really daddy issues, because every one of their games has this quest where you try to find either your father or your son, and you flip-flop them. And that's what you're doing in this game. They make that clear from the get-go. But the way they kind of twist that narrative on its head in Fallout 4 is very interesting. And then the game keeps going for another 20 hours. And I have to say, I really had a great time exploring that narrative.
Would you say it's the most compelling, the interesting story since Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas of those three?
I would say it was definitely the most compelling. It's definitely the longest for me. By comparison, Fallout New Vegas felt forever, because you're just wandering around an open desert to get to the part where you want to, Las Vegas. Fallout 4 does a better job of streamlining it, but also adding a lot more missions to get you from point A in the beginning, where you don't have any guns, any weapons, and you're kind of left wondering what's happening here in the wasteland, to all the way to the end where you understand what you're doing and you decide who to side with before determining the fate of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, even though there's just a lot of really hilarious glitches that people have been posting online, just Fallout's world, the crafting, the atmosphere, the story, these are all huge parts about why this game is on a lot of people's personal top 10s, if not their game of the year of 2015. All right, let's move on to your number 5, and that's Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate.
Yes, I spent a good portion of the beginning of this year playing this game. I pumped about 300 hours into it, which is probably about as long as I pumped into any MMO I've ever played. Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate was, for me, a very addictive game that I could not stop playing. The loot system was fantastic. I loved building and taking down monsters to constantly build new armor sets and new weapons. And the online just felt super smooth. And I loved every minute of the action. There was moments of it where I felt very tense and very powerful. And like a lot of other action games, when you feel like you're mastering the systems, it's very rewarding and very fulfilling once you know what you're doing.
So this is like a third-person action RPG. If you could compare it to any other game that's out there, is there one just like it?
Yeah, I would say if it was the baby of anything, I think if you married the loot style of Diablo 3 with the kind of fast-paced action of a Bloodborne, let's say, you would get Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. It's basically the ultimate hunting simulator. You really feel like when you're attacking certain parts of the monster, those are also the parts that you're looting. So if, for example, if you attack the tail and you take off the monster's tail, you're going to have a better chance of getting a tail part that will help you build better pants, or this rare part that you can use to build weapons. And there's so many different kinds of weapons, everything from crossbows and full-on longbows to swords and hammers and lances and bagpipes. And the weapons basically determine your class. Everything from straight up offense to support to more ranged characters. And for me, all that stuff was very fluid. And it's honestly the best Monster Hunter game for newcomers. A lot of the older Monster Hunter games haven't been as tutorialized, haven't really explained their obscure menu systems or why you're doing any of this stuff. And it just feels really great top to bottom. The one criticism I will say for this game is that a lot of the quests happen in the same level, so you're playing the same 3 or 4 maps over and over and over again. And for me, that was fine, but it did get a little tiresome just exploring the same environments and just seeing that the monsters were in different locations throughout those environments.
This is an interesting handheld game because you can play it on a 3DS or 3DS XL, but to enjoy faster loading times, like better performance, you had to play it on the new Nintendo 3DS. So that I thought was interesting. And another thing I thought was really fascinating was that like Capcom immediately put out this starter pack of DLC that included like this Mario themed equipment. Like your companion could like have Mario suspenders and a hat on, and they even put out like Zelda themed stuff out there. So to have this collaboration between Capcom and Nintendo is really cool for this franchise. But I'm curious, Ryan, did you play any of the other former Monster Hunter games?
I did. I played Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate on Wii U. And for me, why that game didn't click as much was because the controls on the Wii U were not that great. It was hard to really get the same movement speed and finesse that you could on the gamepad than you could with a smaller form factor like the 3DS. And I will say that the playing it on the new 3DS XL, that game for me was a system seller. The little nub that comes on the new 3DS controls the camera for Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, and it does a great job of explaining why that system is so important for that game. The load times were much better. You could tell when you play online with somebody if they were playing it on a newer system or an older system. The older systems tend to lag a little bit more. It was just a really enjoyable experience. There was a moment about hour 100 into the game where I encountered a boss monster that was really massive, and it was in a unique arena, and it's a monster that you're meant to take on with 3 other people, and I did it by myself. And for me, that was the moment that really clicked for me, that I was like, okay, I am the Monster Hunter. This feels great. I feel like I can do anything in this game. And it was a really empowering moment for me.
Really cool, yeah. And this is such a huge series in Japan compared to this region. It's the fastest selling Monster Hunter here in the US for this game, but in Japan, it rivals like series like Pokemon. It's so huge. I'm so glad that it's getting the attention it deserves, because we actually named it our best mobile or handheld game of 2015. And it was even nominated for the larger Game Awards show from Jeff Keighley. So a lot of attention getting to it. It's becoming a bigger, more popular series in North America. Let's move on to number 4. It's Rocket League. I love this game. It was a huge surprise. It won our best surprise for this year. This is a fantastic sports arcade style game. Tell me why you love it so much.
To me, Rocket League reminds me of all the great times I had with NBA Jam, right? It's a simple sports game that feels very arcadey. Like we've said before, easy to learn, hard to master. The controls just feel so good. It's simple. When you watch people play this game, it's not that hard to understand, unlike a Madden where if you don't understand how football works, you don't really understand what's going on. It's soccer with RC cars. You know, how much simpler is that pitch? The game just feels great, top to bottom. It looks great. I'm glad it was free on PS Plus. I don't know that I would have checked this game out otherwise, myself and a lot of other people included. And for me, I'm going to be playing this game well into 2016. This is the game that I think will be on the watch for a multiplayer game of the year. That may take out some of the other multiplayer exclusive games. there was basically no lag from day one. The DLC that they've been releasing for this game, both the free and the paid, feels like very intuitive stuff. It just, top to bottom, Rocket League is a great package. And honestly, the only reason it's not higher on my list is because it doesn't feel like it's a game that can be played in, 20-hour stretches. It's a game that you pick up, when you come home after work and you play for half an hour, have a good time, put it down, and then pick it back up again. It's very relaxing in that way.
It came out of nowhere, and like you said, because it was on PS Plus as a free game, that's, I think, what really surged its popularity. Like, the prequel Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket-Powered Battle Cars in 2008 is not something that was widely recognized. I don't think it was as popular at all. Rocket League just had a huge esports following right away, and it was just talked about by so many different media outlets out there. It's really a great multiplayer game because you can play both locally against bots, which is well supported. There's cross-platform play between PS4 and PC versions, although the newly announced one for Xbox One is not going to support that, which is unfortunate. But their developer, Psyonix, has done an excellent job engaging the community, putting out like flags, cosmetic changes to cars that represent its fandom. Like, Kind of Funny Gamescast has been represented on there, and even Unreal games are put out there. So I think that's really cool. And for me, I went out and actually bought paid DLC even for a free game because I felt it was so worth it, and I played it for so long that I needed to support them. And wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I felt the same way too. And we have a friend who basically only buys one game a year, and that's Call of Duty. And when we introduced him to Rocket League, he was immediately on board, and he also felt the same way, that he feels like he should throw $2 or $3 at the developer just to support this free thing that he really enjoyed. And for me, that really speaks volumes of the kind of crowd that this game really attracted, and the way Psyonix has really supported the community of this game. And, the GIFs that really came out of this game, it feels like you're watching a sports replay, right? It's something that it has that oh snap factor. You realize when somebody is really expertly playing this game, when somebody makes a mistake. It's something that I could watch forever. It's something that I'd actually prefer watching over maybe a football game, because the 5-minute matches just feel very perfectly timed, and it, top to bottom, Rocket League feels very, very great.
It's fun, it's simple, it's highly addictive, and a hallmark of a true, really good game is that it's, again, simple to and easy to learn, but very difficult to master. The floaty physics of the car and the balls, and to get it into this goal is it sounds easy, but it's incredibly difficult in the way that you can master the skills of flipping around, boosting in the air, performing aerials to angle this ball anywhere you want on the field. To play positions, there's a huge amount of strategy that goes into this game, which is why it is a great indie multiplayer sports title. So glad that it's on your personal top 10. And for you, it's number 4. And number 3, moving on, this is also another indie title. Came out of absolutely nowhere, but was developed by one guy, Toby Fox. It's called Undertale. This is a really charming, unique, simple RPG.
Right, and for me, it's the one game on this list that feels like the most earnest game of this year. Everything in this game, the characters, to the music, to the mechanics, just feels like very heartwarming. As the game says, when you try to save the game, it fills you with determination. This game is a game that makes me smile every time I booted it up. It made me genuinely laugh. There are very few games that can achieve comedy quite at the level that Undertale does. Yeah, for me, a lot of the battle mechanics really tie into how the characters play. For example, you fight a spider boss in the later levels that slows down your heart meter, and you try to avoid her attacks, and you're stuck in her web, and you try to avoid the little spiderlings that she throws at you. And this game reminds me a lot of Earthbound in just how quirky and honest and at sometimes really serious it can get. And this is an RPG game where you don't have to fight anybody. You don't have to kill any of the monsters. And actually, that's one of the 3 ways you can actually beat the game. It's called on the internet, it's been called the true pacifist ending. You can only get that by backtracking a little bit after you complete the game once, just doing it the neutral way. And then the other way to finish the game is true genocide, which is you kill every single monster in the game. And the game kind of really encourages you to pushes you along and tries to tell you how to do one of the 3 major endings. And for me, the true pacifist's final boss felt like this very colorful thing that feels like the same way it does as the final boss of Earthbound. It's just it's a boss that feels very, I don't know how to say it, but very...
You're trying to avoid spoilers here, aren't you?
Yeah, it's something that you really need to see. And I think if you're a fan of video games and you haven't played Undertale, you really need to check it out for yourself. It feels like being a part of a cool club that you've completed Undertale and understand why people are so interested in it. It's just a fantastic, honest game.
Yeah, it's simple. The battles are really interesting, I think, because this is an RPG that's turn-based. You're fighting these monsters, but the fighting is totally optional. But you can talk your way out of battling and totally escape fighting any monster you want. But if you're forced to fight, it's sort of like this like escape, shoot 'em up gameplay mechanic, and has shades of WarioWare style gameplay. Like every enemy has a different way of trying to attack you, controlling this little heart cursor around a very small screen. Like you said, with the spider, it could be webs. If you're facing against a frog, it's going to try to jump and leap at you. And that's why I think makes it really kind of a quirky and unique cult classic game. Really, it's sort of, I don't think it between the turn-based elements and like these live combat, like shoot 'em up parts, they combine them in such a way that actually really works. And its graphics and really contribute to its story. It evokes a lot of emotion despite it being such a simple game. And that's what I think makes it really a fascinating, compelling indie game. It's a short experience, about 8 to 10 hours, but it's full of a lot of jokes and wit and charm and great characters, excellent writing, and very, very surprising to come from one guy working on this game. I believe he only had a small amount of help with the soundtrack, but this is a guy who was self-taught in programming and even working on chiptunes for this game. So super impressive. And I don't think he even expected the amount of success and attention that it's received. Glad it's on your list, definitely, for sure. Anything else you want to say about Undertale?
Yeah, this is a game I'm going to be thinking about for a long time. I think I'm not the only one. The characters are just so memorable, and I honestly wish every indie game had this level of quality to it. Very well done and well-deserved place on most people's top 10 lists this year.
This is another game. Your number 2 is going to be on a lot of people's Game of the Year discussions, and that's Super Mario Maker. If you can even define this as a game and not just a builder, like a level customization tool, this is an excellent game that's really pushed out a lot of Wii U's for Nintendo, and I have to give them a round of applause for that because, man, it's fascinating to see the creations that people have come up with to play around with all the different Mario mechanics across all the different Mario games and the styles. Really fascinating. And I love to see this kind of game. Why is it number 2 on your list and not number 1?
For me, the reason it's number 2 and not number 1 is because some of the more goal-oriented gameplay part of it isn't as well done as I would have liked it. But I have to say that Super Mario Brothers is basically the least common denominator in most people's gaming language, right? Everybody understands how Mario jumps, how the power-ups work. We've been playing the game since, 30 years ago. And Super Mario Maker, for me, is the culmination of every platformer that Nintendo has ever constructed. And it's them really saying, we might not ever do a true 2D spiritual successor to the original Super Mario Brothers games, but why don't you go ahead and build your own? And for me, Super Mario Brothers 3 is probably number one in my heart of games that I like to revisit, and in my personal top 10 games of all time. And now I can build as many Super Mario Brothers 3 levels as I want. I never have to stop. A lot of the curation tools that Nintendo has improved upon since the game's release have really made that way more possible. If I only want to play Super Mario Brothers 3 levels, I can do that. If I only want to build Super Mario Brothers 3 levels, I can do that. But the other templates, Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario World, the one that I'm not as interested in is New Super Mario Brothers, but I understand why people will like that. I think this Super Mario package has it all for whatever Mario level you're interested in building. And for me, it's a game that really, truly speaks to everyone, regardless of where you are in your gaming career.
As a game creation and this publishing tool, it's really interesting to see the creations that have been out there. Like, people have put levels out there that are autoplay levels where it takes you from start to finish without you having to move at all. And that's just using the mechanics that are built into Super Mario games. And I just think that's really, really fascinating. And some people are just creating troll-worthy levels where they're just brutally hard. They're creating like things like impossible jumps that need to be accomplished by jumping on multiple enemies. Like, it's just really fascinating to see what people can come up with, and the way that Nintendo has allowed you to really change how Mario can be played. Like, enemies can be combined with like a mushroom, and they can have like a larger version of themselves. You can give power-ups with wings so they can fly around. I just love to see this kind of customization that Nintendo has enabled its players to put out there. I'm endlessly fascinated with what people are going to come up with. But let me ask you, did you get into Super Mario Maker to play other people's levels or to design your own?
I think it's both column A, column B, right? I think anybody our age, as a kid, drew out Mario levels and tried to design them themselves, and this is the ultimate manifestation of that, right? It's something we've always wanted to do, and the game does a really great job of showing you where people die and how many people have cleared your level, and it's a really great game development teaching tool, and it teaches you how to make levels easier, how to make levels harder. For me, the interesting part is watching people really experiment with the Mario mechanics to really create some really interesting levels and doing things you never thought were possible in Mario games. It's really great stuff. And when Nintendo experiments, I think they really do a great job of getting people to play with their tools and think about their games in different ways. And congratulations, they've done that with one of the most storied franchises in gaming. Just well done. And they've made a level editor compelling. This is the first time I've actually been interested in a level editor in a game ever.
Agreed. It gives you really this new sense of appreciation for what Mario has done for video games. The way they're designed, and I love seeing this kind of thing. Nintendo really going outside the boundaries of what they normally put out and what they allow the Mario games to do. But there are some limitations, like there are noticeably some things that just aren't present in Mario. So, like, does that hold it back? Like, is that why it's not number one and not a perfect game in your eyes?
I agree. I think there are some things that are being left out. For example, in the Mario Brothers 3 template, they don't give you the Tanuki suit. They just give you the Raccoon Mario power-up. I think that's a misstep. I think that's also something that they can add as DLC. They've added a lot of free DLC. They've added checkpoints. They've added some free courses that you can play and unlock more skins for the Amiibo mushroom. And I think that's something that they could eventually get into. They could even add more Mario templates like Mario Brothers 2 or some of the other more traditional Mario games. It's a package that I'm endlessly fascinated by, and something that's going to honestly keep the Wii U in my gaming life for a long time.
Now for the last one on your list, which is actually your top one. It's number one on your personal Game of the Year 2015 list. It's Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. I know you're a huge, huge fan of this series. You played this one on PC, right?
I did, and I think the reasons I did were for performance issues. I really enjoyed Ground Zeroes on PS4, but I was honestly looking for a better graphical experience because I knew this was going to be more of an open world game, and it was. It was the Metal Gear Solid game I think people have been waiting for a very long time. I am one of the rare people who will defend Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, originally on the PSP. It was a game that I think was had some serious issues for sure, but a lot of the systems around it were something I was looking forward to in a bigger Metal Solid game, and then they put it in the Phantom Pain. They built a huge base building element. You can build your own mother base and send out your troops on combat missions. They support you in battle. They can drop in supplies and weapons and give you intel on enemy soldier movements. For me, I can't separate my nostalgia for the Metal Gear series from my love of this game. They're one and the same, and it's something that really compelled me to keep playing this game. I'm still playing it. I want to get 100% completion. That's something I never want to do in open world games, but it's just because the worlds that Kojima and his collaborators have built has been so fantastic. It's a game that I can't stop playing. It just feels really great.
But this is truly the least Metal Gear-like game in the series. It's open world. It plays very similarly to Ground Zeroes, but only in the sense of the way the enemies and the way you yourself control. It's so open world and it's so free-flowing. There's mainline quests, of course, that are story-related, but a ton of side stuff that you can do. And you can really get engrossed by playing this game. Does that really, is that a detriment to this game versus past Metal Gear games? Is this one like the pinnacle of the series?
I think for me, it is the pinnacle. Metal Gear games in the past have felt like a very directed experience. The stealth actions of it always seem like they're kind of balancing against this action element. The Metal Gear games always have way more guns blazing guns than they do stealth guns. And it's been kind of hard because they try to encourage you to play the game stealthy. And it didn't feel like until this game that you could really do that was a really viable strategy. And they've made this stealth game an open world, which is already very impressive. And then they've made it possible so that if you play it guns blazing, if you're not interested in stealth or a situation goes sideways, you can totally still perform your task and do the mission without being too penalized for it. I am amazed that they were able to do that while making the game feel fair and balanced. And I think the only criticism for me was that the Skulls missions felt like boss battles that were totally unnecessary. But I really like the way the game played. And we haven't talked yet about the game's story, which is as Metal Gear could be, which is to say it's really crazy. It's this whole misdirection, and then eventually it leads up to this twist that while you don't see it coming the first time you play it, when you think about it, you feel like it's been foreshadowed the whole time, right? The big twist is that.
Well, wait a minute. Before you go any further, we've got to give a massive spoiler alert. If you are not interested in hearing what the Metal Gear Solid 5 story is about, please fast forward or pause, skip ahead. We're about to get into some massive Metal Gear spoiler territory, and we don't want to ruin it for you if you haven't checked it out yet. So, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, so the whole game tells you that you're Big Boss and you're trying to rebuild after the events of Ground Zeroes. And then what you eventually learn is that you don't play as Big Boss. You're playing as the medic who was also blown up in that helicopter, if you remember from Ground Zeroes. And you're just made to look like Big Boss. And the real Big Boss escaped with you in the first level in the hospital. And he was all bandaged up. You couldn't see him. The way they actually tell that is I think a little lame. They have you replay the hospital level, but with a different perspective. And but I think that twist is so well done. It's something that I didn't see coming, and I was just like, I practically put the controller and I was like, wow, I can't believe they did that. They told you this entire time that you were Big Boss, and that all the other characters believed in it. Kaz believes in it. Ocelot believes that you're Big Boss, and it's this whole thing that you're supposed to be that, and then it turns out that it's not. It's, oh my god, it was a better twist than the Knights of the Old Republic, which is basically this also the same twist. It was the better twist than the BioShock, would you kindly twist. It was, for me, it was the best twist in a video game that I have thought about in a long time. And the only thing I have to say is that I wish that they actually had finished the story. It felt like, so after you beat the Metal Gear mecha in this game, you fight the big bad, and then it goes, okay, chapter 2. And it feels like there's more game that they were planning on making, and then what they do is they make you repeat some of the missions to get you to uncover this massive spoiler that I just told you. And yeah, I would play this game until my dying day. It feels like the infinite stealth game I've always kind of thought about Metal Gear should eventually lead up to. And if this is the last Metal Gear game that we ever get, kudos to the developers.
It's a flashy story, but it's also super convoluted. Even for Metal Gear, I mean, they're all really convoluted. Kojima, I think, really gets himself into some bad places, like mixing up storylines, and it's just very difficult to follow and understand the way the way he writes his characters and these competing timelines. It's very hard to follow. And I want to ask you, do you think it's holding it back? Like, is it difficult for newcomers to play and appreciate and enjoy the story that Metal Gear Solid 5 presents?
I think they present most of the main story beats in cutscenes, and I think a lot of the little details that would explain the convolutedness are locked away in cassette tapes that you have to find, which I think is kind of an interesting approach for the hardcore Metal Gear fan like myself. I'm going to listen to all of those, but I think you'll be able to follow the main plot lines of the story if you just follow the cutscenes. And if you're not interested in the details, that's fine. If you are interested in the details, that's there for the player.
Yeah, it's an incredibly rich and complex story. It seems like Kojima's magnum opus, especially because this might be the last Metal Gear game that we ever see, because now that they've had a huge falling out, Kojima is no longer employed by Konami. I hope that this is the last Metal Gear Solid game that we see, because I don't know if it can get any better than this, because it's received a ton of perfect scores from a lot of different media outlets. I think definitely I have to agree with you and respect the fact that it's number one on your list. It's personally my favorite in the series. I've never really enjoyed the stealth aspects of a lot of those other Metal Gear games. They've been fantastic, but they're just not for me. And to play this game in any way you choose, you can go out guns blazing in a flashy style, or you can go completely stealth. It's really up to you, and it does not matter which style that you play in. So I think that makes this game the most accessible in that franchise. And congratulations to Kojima for creating not only an excellent singular game in The Phantom Pain, but a universe that people really research and appreciate and follow. I think a lot of fans are upset that he may not be creating anymore. So have you said your piece, or you want to say anything more about your number one game for this year?
No, it's a really fantastic game, and I think it is the open world game to play this year. If you haven't played it yet, you should definitely check it out. It's just a great game.
And with that, this wraps up Ryan's top 10 Editor's Choice Game of the Year, his personal top 10 for 2015. Thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing those. And let's wrap up the show by saying that's it. Please subscribe and review us on iTunes and Stitcher. If you review us, it helps us gain new followers, new audience members. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a couple minutes to do so. Let us know truly what you think of our show.
All of our episodes can also be heard on our site, which is 1pvs2p.com. You can also subscribe through RSS by clicking on our site's sidebar button.
More notes and more of our Game of the Year honors, our deliberations, are posted at the link in the show notes. You can also follow all of our awards for the month of December by liking us on Facebook, facebook.com/1pvs2p. You can also follow us on Twitter at 1pvs2p_podcast. And tweet at us, definitely. If you have some questions, if you disagree with some of our choices, definitely let us know. We'd also like to thank Phonetic Hero for the use of his songs for our show. They're all part of the compilation project Chiptunes Equals Win. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks so much for sharing your personal top 10.
Yeah, and I look forward to hearing your personal top 10, which will be next week's show. Stay tuned to the 1P versus 2P podcast for continued coverage of 2015 Game of the Year.